I have no fucking idea what's going on. Let me introduce you to big scaly baddies, windswept deserts, brilliant lightning storms, okay graphical fidelity, and a frame rate that's lower than P. Diddy's morals. That's right, ladies and gents, I, Jarek Defiler, put my patient gaming philosophy on the back burner for a bit in order to dip my toes into the open beta of a beloved gaming franchise that has been around since the Pliocene epoch. So sit back and open them ear holes as I grant you my sacrosanct opinion on my first impressions of the Monster Hunter Wilds open beta. For starters, let me put my background experience with the Monster Hunter franchise out on the table. There is none. I have yet to play a single Monster Hunter title in all my years on this sexy blue planet. Monster Hunter World has been on my wish list for probably 4 or 5 years collecting dust and cobwebs and, well, it's basically a geriatric digital wonder at this point. So when I saw that Com of Cap was hosting an open beta test, I thought, fuck it, why not? It's free after all and I might be able to finally see what all the hubbub is about. But I decided to go in completely blind. I have seen a video or two long ago that were done during the last beta from some content creators I respect and whose taste aligned with my own. They seemed to enjoy it, so I figured I might enjoy it as well. Granted, they all had experience in the franchise from what I recall. So besides that, I didn't look into the game at all. I purposely did zero research in order to approach this from a complete noob's perspective, for I am a noob. I went in not knowing anything about the combat, mechanics, story, themes, or concepts. And, well, gotta be honest here, my friends, I didn't really enjoy my time with Monster Hunter Wilds, unfortunately. Now, that said, I believe the fault here most likely lies with myself, but not 100%. There are a few issues that I think are a problem of the game, or at least in the context of this open beta. And that being said, let me just be clear here. When I say the game, or Monster Hunter Wild specifically, I am only referring to this open beta, not the full release because, naturally, I do not know what the full release will be like. No one does at this point, so I can only go off of my experiences with this beta. Please keep in mind that that is what I am referring to when I reference the game. Okay, groundwork laid, here is my rather ignorant first impressions of Monster Hunter Wilds. For starters, the game is not very noob-friendly in my humble opinion. Upon getting past the tutorials and character creation, which is awesome by the way, I probably spent a good 45 minutes to an hour making my character in Palico. What can I say, I like playing dress up in my video games. But once past that, you are bombarded with a plethora of information. The problem is, the game mostly presents this to you as if you already know what it all means. And I didn't, and mostly still don't. You know, I am a veteran gamer. I'm no stranger to the jargon or mechanics and concepts of various genres across the gaming spectrum. And I had so much trouble trying to figure out what all these icons, numbers, terms, and details meant when working my way through the absolute monstrosity of HUD menus, crafting menus, and UI. And there is just so much of it. I found myself completely at a loss at what I was looking at the majority of the time. I mean, like, what is this supposed to be? The monster's health bar? A compass? A quest timer? No idea. I wasn't even sure if there was health bars for the monsters I was fighting. Granted, in some segments, like the crafting screen, there is a decent setup of tooltips and explanations for each material, but in other areas there are icons and whatnot that you'll see that you have no idea what they mean. It's utterly confusing for someone new. The game just isn't super great at communicating information to new players. That's a problem, but at least that's one that can be overcome with time. So most of the time I was just wandering around not knowing what the hell I was supposed to do. Sure, you hunt monsters, but as I was saying, sure you hunt monsters, but to what end? Why am I hunting them? For crafting stuff? No point in that as far as I could tell because the beta overloads you with everything you need. It gives you 1500 potions, 9999 ammo, and more. Not sure what I'm supposed to be crafting here. Not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. Took me a while to even find the quest log, to be honest. But the bigger issue I had with this game is the combat. I suspect this is supposed to be the game's bread and butter. And I'm sure Monster Hunter veterans probably really enjoy this combat, but as a noob to the franchise, I found it extremely frustrating. I had less frustration playing Dark Souls for the first time back in the day than I did playing Monster Hunter Wilds, and that's saying a lot. Now, in my playtime, I use both mouse and keyboard and controller extensively. It is clear to me that this game was specifically designed to be played with a controller. It's a lot more fluid, more responsive, and managing the UI is much less janky in my opinion, outside of the rotary options anyways. Mouse and keyboard was pretty much a nightmare. This game requires this smooth directional input from a controller joystick that WASD just cannot emulate well. Also with mouse and keyboard, it felt like the game just couldn't keep up with my furious clicks. Fastest fingers in the West, this stallion. But it was like there was input lag or something. I would find myself having to spam a key or mouse click in order to get the game to do what I wanted it to, not just in combat, but in general. Didn't really have as much of a problem with that when using a controller. That said, the combat was still rather frustrating for me overall. Again, this is undoubtedly a me problem and not one of the game's, but it's still my first impression and combat simply felt very clunky to me. I just couldn't get into it, and a big problem I had is with the camera and directional input. I found myself fighting the camera and movement mechanics more than the monsters. Your character doesn't attack in the camera's direction, making it difficult to get a grasp on which direction you want to attack based on where the character's facing. The only way you can have the camera locked to your attack point of view is if you use the focus mode, which I found to be rather annoying. The weightiness of the weapons are fairly well done, but you don't feel like you're doing much damage because despite your attacks having oomph, the numbers you put out are trivial and it takes like 7 hours to kill one monster. It just feels like your attacks aren't doing much. And it makes me wonder if this is the norm for Monster Hunter games. If so, then more power to them, no skin off my back, it's just not really my cup of tea. Another issue I had with the combat was the inconsistency. This was mostly a problem with the dreaded mouse and keyboard. I started with the insect glaive as my main weapon, started to think this was a mistake because it was very weird. Fun when you get it going, but weird nonetheless. Kind of like dating a hot goth girl that wants to bring copious amounts of black candles into the bedroom, know what I mean? Anyways, the glaive has this hopping mechanic that jettisons you in the air and allows you to evade and dash around while up there. This was cool and fun, but incredibly inconsistent for me. There were times where I was spending minutes during a fight just trying to get this jump mechanic to work properly so I could try and get on the monster's back, but the game would just not register my clicks. I didn't change the key bindings because there were just too many and I didn't want to waste time given this is a limited beta, so I stuck with the default layout and it was just super janky. For instance, it took me like 12 hours to figure out what this icon was supposed to be. I've never seen this before in a game, but it kept popping up in the tooltips telling me to use it. It wasn't until I clicked every button on my rig imaginable that I realized it was the mouse 4 and 5 button. Like, what? How is that a mouse? And when you're in combat, the game tries to help you out by throwing all these keybinds at you in the upper right corner so you can try and read them all while getting spin on non-stop by a giant lizard because there's no pausing in the game, by the way, given it's trying to be an open world MMO or something. I don't know. But anyways, back to the combat. I didn't realize that combos were a big thing because the weapon tutorial, which I spent a decent amount of time in, just gave me the basic attacks. So the entire time I was playing, I thought you only had like 2 to 3 attacks that you would just spam. It wasn't until I randomly did this massive whirlwind type combo thing that I realized there was a combo system in the game. And I've never been able to reproduce it because I didn't know how I pulled it off in the first place. So there is no doubt a much deeper combat system here that I was just scratching the surface on, but for the life of me, I could not figure it out because I'm a moron, and the game didn't seem to help me out much in that regard either. I'm hoping this might be something the full release remedies. But I did notice that when locked into an attack, you're basically stuck there until the animations are over, leaving no room to evade or move in another direction until the attack is done. I hated this because it felt like I was the one being played rather than me playing the character. For instance, in this sequence on screen, I was pressing the D key this entire time in order to try and get my character to attack to the right. But the animations say nope, and I'm stuck constantly attacking left, albeit slowly moving right like a centimeter at a time. Super frustrating because try correcting that while you're in the middle of an intense battle with a giant monster. And if the game wasn't so easy, which I assume is just a beta thing, I probably would have died a million times over. But given the monsters didn't really do much damage, I was able to kind of just stand there while they wailed on me while I was trying to figure out how to do combos and even just the most basic of attacks such as the glaive jump. In fact, the only time I died, or fainted or whatever, was when I was fighting the big flying lightning bird thing. It wasn't a particularly hard fight, I was just trying to do silly things like jump on its back and stuff. I would assume the full release will be much more challenging, or at least I hope so. But yeah, overall the combat was just not fun for me, unfortunately. The unresponsive nature of the controls and directional input just left a very bitter taste in my mouth. I simply could not get into it no matter how hard I tried. And that sucks because, again, I have a feeling it's most likely my own fault here, but I also feel I am not being given adequate information in the game to figure this out. I shouldn't have to look up guides and wikis to understand the fundamentals of combat. So like I said before, it feels like the game expects you to know all of this stuff already. But again, it may just be a problem with the beta. I don't know. Moving on, let's talk about performance. For me, it was horrible. That Australian breakdancing chick at the Olympics had better performance than this. I was hovering around the 44 to 50 frames per second range on Ultra. Switching to lowest graphical settings bumped me up to a whopping 50 to 55 FPS. For me, that's kind of unheard of. The only game that gave me similar or worse performance was Valheim when I built a gigantic castle. Now, in fairness, my rig isn't top of the line anymore, but it's not exactly something to sneer at either. I run a Ryzen 9 3900X, 32 gigs RAM, and a 2080 Ti. About time for me to upgrade, no doubt, but I never have performance issues in modern games, really. I mean, when I was playing Helldivers 2, I was getting a consistent 120 to 144 frames per second. With Mountain Blade Bannerblorgs, I was getting about the same, 120 to 144. Here, 44 to 55 was the norm, and there was a point when I was in town and tons of people were logged in and it dropped to 10 frames per second. Not good at all, my friends, but I'm hoping this is merely an issue with the beta and not something most would see on release. I don't know, I'm not too familiar with Capcom titles, so I can't say what their release history is like, but for me, 44 FPS is unacceptable. I expect 90 minimum. And I wonder what it's going to be like for players that have even worse rigs than mine, because not everybody is using high-end equipment. And if the graphics were something super special, I could maybe understand, but in Monster Hunter Wilds, the game looks good, don't get me wrong, but it's not exactly anything super special either. My jaw wasn't dropping on the floor at the game's graphical fidelity in its generic desert region, rocky cliffs, or Sahara-style biomes. Now, there is a plethora of physics and stuff going on with the weather and environmental systems that may be gutting my hardware, I don't know, but that is one point where the game does shine, its physics and animations. Sexy stuff. The monsters you're fighting have really awesome animations with nice telegraphing that allows you to learn their movesets and adapt accordingly. There's lots of sand flying around and storms and interactable objects thrown into the mix to make fights more interesting. And what was really cool is that when you're fighting a monster, others may randomly join in and help you if you get into their territory. So you can end up having these epic monster battles with like 3 or 4 different types of monsters. I thought this was really neat, but that performance though, rough. So yeah, that covers the basics of my first impression. There are other things I didn't expound on, like the lobby system, crafting, the MMO type nature and whatnot. Those all seemed fine, I guess. I didn't try any of the multiplayer stuff because I just didn't have an interest in it and I didn't have time. But my thoughts on Monster Hunter Wilds can be summed up by my opening statement. I have no fucking idea what I'm doing, and the game doesn't really help me to remedy that. Information dumps, clunky unresponsive combat, poor performance, lack of smooth directional input all led me to just not wanting to continue playing the game. Maybe this is all just a problem with the beta, I hope so. I have no doubt part of the problem is just me, but there's a reason I'm a patient gamer, and part of that reason is because I've been burned by so many games I've bought on release just completely letting me down over the years. I thank Capcom for a beta of Monster Hunter Wilds, but I feel like I was playing a cinematic trailer more than an actual demo. Everything felt scripted, so I have no idea if this is a proper representation of the full game. So yeah, that's my first impressions, ladies and gents. Will I be getting Monster Hunter Wilds on release? No, I don't think it's a game made for me. But hey, pays to be a patient gamer, so maybe after 6 months or so after the game's release, I'll check it out and see where it's at with the player base. Until then, I have like 300 games on my backlog that I'm far more interested in playing at the moment. But if you are a Monster Hunter fan, maybe this is right up your alley and you're familiar with the concepts and combat of the franchise. I'd really like to know, so it would be much appreciated if any of you out there that are familiar with the series could tell me what you might think. Have you tried the beta? Does it meet your expectations? Let me know in the comments because this has been a franchise I've wanted to get into for a long time. Just maybe it's not what I thought it was. But for any noobs to Monster Hunter out there, like yours truly, you might want to wait for the final consensus after the game has been exposed to the masses in its entirety. Let the people speak, know what I mean? Thanks for watching this far. This has been Jarek Defiler, the not-so-patient gamer today. You have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night depending on where you are, and I hope that those who have played the Monster Hunter Wilds beta enjoyed it far more than I did. Peace out.